Hey, hello. Welcome to episode number 90 of the People We Love podcast. I am Adam Choit. What's up? If you're new here, what I do is interview people from all walks of life, often comedians and other artists, about their lives and careers. The conversation is casual, but I also ask everyone to highlight someone they love, someone who they admire, who influenced them, inspired them, or supported them. For more, check out peoplewelovepodcast.com. That's peoplewelovepodcast.com. And the Instagram handle is at peoplewelovepodcast. And I'm on Instagram as well at Adam Choit, my name, if you want to follow me too. And please remember to tap subscribe or follow on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. And of course, positive reviews on iTunes are greatly appreciated as well. So, today's guest is comedian TK Kelly. This current Tosh.0 staff writer is originally from New York and got more comfortable in school in 5th grade when he started to be able to make the other kids laugh. Before long, his grandfather introduced him to George Carlin, and really the rest is history. After college and living briefly in New York, TK moved to LA to study screenwriting at USC grad school, and from there his journey as a stand-up and writer truly began in Los Angeles. But let's just get started. Here's TK Kelly. So it's good to see you today, TK Kelly. Thank you for joining me on the Zoom here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate you thinking of me.
Oh, how are you holding up during this super fun 2020? Been an amazing, fun year for you?
We're getting through it, man. I don't know. It's crazy. It's hard to even quantify at this point, but I'm hoping we're closer to taking steps forward instead of continually going backwards here. But who knows? You know, until we get some kind of leadership in place who gives a fuck, I think we're all like kind of stuck where we are.
Yeah, you're able to stay somewhat positive. It seems like your disposition, you seems like a fairly good attitude. You have your moments.
I'm putting it on for the podcast, baby.
Yeah.
No, it's
you're acting. You've acting experience too.
I'm trying to stay somewhat positive. I had a baby daughter last year, so she just turned 1. So I'm like, all right, don't be a complete cynic and give up hope, because otherwise that's admitting like, oh, she's kind of fucked and we probably shouldn't have done this to her. Shouldn't have brought her into this world and been like, sorry.
Bring her in anyway.
Yeah,
YOLO.
she's good. She's doing good. And the one positive thing out of all this is like I've gotten to spend a ton of time with her that I wouldn't have otherwise. I would have been busy with work and stand up and the podcast. So this has been like, I got 5 months straight just hanging out with her. I was taking care of my kid during the day while my wife worked from home. And then when they started back up at Tosh.0, I've been working from home anyway, so I at least still get to see her all the time, which is cool.
That's cool. That's great. Silver lining. It's a great silver lining.
Exactly.
Right there.
You got to take what you can at this point, man.
For sure. Well, why don't we get into it? Why don't you tell me about your life? And you grew up in New York originally. What are your kind of like earliest memories from like even like before elementary school? That's kind of what I ask everyone. Does something or anything jump out at you from?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
real early.
My earliest memories are Staten Island, which I lived there until I was, I think, 5 years old. But my whole extended family is still there and tons of close friends are still there. So I feel like I remember it well from being a little kid there. I just grew up on this quiet little street that was kind of, it was shitty. I'm not going to lie. It was a shitty little street.
Shitty, quiet street.
I mean, it was quiet, but it was a sad quiet, you know? It was like,
okay.
It was backed by like the part of the railroad tracks that they didn't even use anymore. It was Staten Island is not the nicest place in the world, and we weren't in the nicest part of it, but my parents grew up there and they'd been there forever. And, they bounced when we were 5, but we were there for a while. I remember it was a weird like factory behind my house that I still to this day have no idea what they did or if it was functioning, but it was a terrifying thing to have right behind your house as a small child.
That is funny.
I think my earliest memories are like looking out my bedroom window and seeing this mysterious, creepy building that I am like, this thing's going to eat me when I go to sleep for sure.
Did you have siblings growing up in Staten Island or, out there?
Yeah, I have an older sister. She's 4 years older than me. And then I have a younger brother, but we left Staten Island right when he was born. So mostly that was like that's what I remember too from that time, is that's the only time it was just me and my sister, and kind of close enough in age that like we were like best buds way back then. And then my brother came along and sucked out all the fun.
And where did you move to? Where did you guys move to? You know, when you said you were, I think 5 years old, you just said?
Yeah. When we were five, we moved up. When I was five, we moved up to Orange County, New York, which is like probably like an hour and a half ish outside of the city. So it was like a big change, because Staten Island is not exactly like the other boroughs. It's not built up like that, but it still has that city feel. And then we went upstate, and it was like farms and nothingness as far as the eye could see. So it was a big difference. But we moved up there mostly because my father got on the fire department in New York City, and weirdly enough, it was a shorter commute from upstate than it was from where we were in Staten Island, because it was just insanely like horrible traffic or a terrible train commute. So
wow.
Yeah, it was a weird thing, but it was like, he gets this job in Manhattan and then forces us out of the city, but it ended up being a really good thing for us, I think.
It's funny how I'm from Long Island, also originally from the East Coast.
Okay, what part, man?
Dix Hill's out in Suffolk. Used to live in East Meadow also. A couple of different towns.
Okay.
Spent time there. But it's funny how you say upstate is like an hour and a half outside the city. I bet people who live in actual upstate New York do not consider. If you're from the Adirondacks, you're like, that is not upstate New York. That is just.
Of course not, man. I have family even like up in Lake George or Cortland, and that's real upstate, and that's like absolutely nothing. But it's crazy how fast, like, we were close to the city relatively, but people from the city were always shocked when they saw it, like how fast New York gets like country. It's just a different world up there. And it's not like, Long Island is more similar to Staten Island, and it's crowded. It's lots of cars, lots of traffic, lots of people. But upstate, man, it's just quiet.
What do you remember about that move to upstate when you were, other than it being quiet? Do you remember it being a hard adjustment? Do you remember being happy to be there, or just not having strong feelings either way? I
mean, I remember hating the idea of it, because my best friend, when I was that young, but I had known him since he was born. Sure. He lived on the other side of that factory. So he was like right around the block. And that was the biggest thing, was I was just like, even at 5, I'm like, how dare you take me away from my best friends? Right. I was devastated. But then, you meet people up there, and his family and my family were so close that we've stayed friends anyway. He was the best man in my wedding. So it didn't change anything really. But I remember being scared. I hated change as a kid. I think any big change really threw me. I didn't like the idea of moving, and when anybody moved away, it was just like, my world is over. Right, because you live in sort of, as not you, but like kids especially, you live in an insular world. It's just your school, it's just your town, and you don't really see life beyond that, especially since you can't really travel anywhere when you're elementary school aged on your own or whatever. So that must have been, man. It's been a little bit of an adjustment for sure. Yeah. I remember even a few years after moving upstate, we weren't in the middle of nowhere. We had houses around us, so we had a group of friends from the neighborhood, and slowly a lot of them moved away. And I remember when the last one did, I like threw a tantrum and demanded that we move somewhere else, because like, this place is over. We got to get the fuck out. That's funny. How old were you when you said that? I was probably like between 10, 11-ish, probably. Yeah. It was a big thing. I was always convinced that like, if a friend leaves, even, 15 minutes away, half hour away, it was like, that's over. You're never going to see them again. And of course I stayed in touch with all of them, especially now. It's so easy to. For sure. And what kind of kid were you, like in elementary school? What were you into? Were you good at school? Were you into sports? Were you into TV? What were you doing? I was good at school. I really loved TV. I was really super quiet until 5th grade. I think I just didn't quite understand where I fit in elementary school. It kind of seemed like the kids were either like the sports kids, or they were like the complete other side of the spectrum, the really good at school and you know, not the coolest, I guess, whatever that means in elementary
Yeah.
school. But I always felt like in between there, because I felt like I was good at school, but I didn't care as much as those kids cared. And then I was good at sports, but I was a little nervous to get involved. I think I was a little afraid, I think, of going all out. And then in like fifth grade, I had to go to a new school, another big change. We didn't move, but our school districts got reworked. So I got shuffled around in the last year of elementary school. And that was like the best thing that happened for me, because I didn't know anybody there and they didn't know me. And when I got there, I just kind of was able to figure out who I was a bit more. I started making jokes and in class, and people would laugh, and I realized, like, oh, I like that. Like, I mean, doing that and being more comfortable socially, I think made me a little bit more comfortable in general. And then like sports became a really bigger part of my life for a while, because I loved playing and I was good enough that I could keep doing it through high school.
Was that ever a conscious choice or decision that you made on when you moved to a new place to sort of, oh, this is thinking yourself, this is a fresh start, I can be the new person, I can make jokes? Or was it just something that was more of just a process of discovery, you know, started by, you know, starting over, you know, by starting over?
Honestly, probably more of the latter. I'd like to think that I like geared up for it and was like, I'm gonna be a whole new man. No, this is fifth grade. I'm not fucking around anymore. But like,
right.
Honestly, I don't remember that at all. I remember being scared. I remember thinking like, this is my last year of this part of school, and I had just started to get comfortable at the last place, and now I was going to this new place. But there was enough kids in the same boat with me who got switched over too, that I wasn't completely alone in that. I knew kids from my old school who got moved over. And I think, honestly, it just happened by accident. I don't even remember what I said. I just remember one day early on in the year in class making a joke, and I had never really done that. I said something in reaction to what the teacher had said, and I remember the funny kid in class laughed, and I was like, oh my God. That guy is awesome. Like, he thinks I'm funny. I was like, I thought he was the funniest dude on the planet. So I think he gets all the credit for anything I've done after that. He opened me up there.
That's sort of amazing or interesting that you remember that, because I remember being a kid and like I wasn't the class clown, I wasn't like super rambunctious, but I would like to make a joke once in a while that either some of the kids or the teacher or everyone would laugh at, like at least like once a day. And I always like kind of remember that, but I don't remember like the first time like viscerally experiencing making other people laugh in school and that being a profound moment for me, where like it is for you. And that makes me think that you're probably meant to be the comedian because of that.
I mean, but the thing is, what kills me about it is I have no idea what I said. Like, I don't remember that at all. I just remember the feeling of like a funny person thought that was funny. And that was like the first validation I felt like I had ever really had at school. I was, obviously way more comfortable at home. And I come from a family of shit givers. So there was a lot of joking around all the time, especially between my extended family, my dad and my uncles and stuff. So I witnessed it, but I just hadn't engaged in it that much. And once I got the reaction that I had seen people get who I thought were funny, that was just like, that's it. That's my thing. Because I was also like, I love sports. And like I said, I kept playing them, but I was a small kid. So it wasn't like, as much as I thought I was going to end up in the NBA, it was not in the cards. So it was like being the funny guy felt like where I could operate the best and survive school.
Is that something? And you pretty much came to that conclusion fairly early on. It sounds like when you were 10, 11, 12 years old, you knew you wanted to be funny. You knew that would be your way to, fit in socially. You like sports, but you knew you probably weren't going to be a professional. Did you kind of reach all those conclusions fairly early?
I mean, I don't know if I met the sports conclusion that early.
Right. Everyone realizes that too late.
Yeah, I would say that was probably like 7th or 8th grade when I really started realizing like, okay, like this is fun and I love playing, but I honestly, it wasn't even it wasn't even necessarily like you're a small white dude, the NBA is not happening, but it was, I don't think I had it in me to commit to something that hard. Like I realized I would much rather be dicking around with my friends and making them laugh than going to practice every day after school. I knew I was like really good friends with a lot of guys on the sports teams, and most of them, I felt like they hated playing on that team way more than they hated playing. They'd rather be playing with their friends, I guess is what I mean. So,
Yeah.
it just didn't have that in me. And I just loved to make people laugh. And then when I was, when I moved into middle school in sixth grade, that was like, I was in the smart kid class. And I remember feeling really out of place there. And there was one other guy who I just clicked with, and he became my best friend, and he was so funny and so weird. And all we did was screw around, and we both got kicked out of the Smart Kids program, but it was worth it.
You're finding your way in a sense.
Yeah, and not the wisest choice, but like it just wasn't me to commit that hard to schoolwork either. It just didn't matter. To me, the grades were like, I'll work hard enough to get good grades, but I'm not going to be the guy like scrapping for valedictorian or anything like that. Like,
I was a little similar for sure in that regard. Were you watching comedy at that point in middle school? Were you watching SNL
Definitely.
or stand up or whatever was on?
Yeah. So middle school was when I really like became obsessed with comedy. My grandfather was pretty into movies and TV and music in general. So he like weirdly introduced me to most of the cool things that I knew as a kid. Like I'm the only person I've ever met whose grandfather introduced them to the White Stripes because he thought they were a good band that was going to do big things. And I was like, okay,
Wow.
yeah, I swear to God. I'm like, okay, grandpa, whatever. And then he was right. He should have been a music exec. But he introduced me to Carlin, I think around that time. He had just old VHS tapes that he had taped his specials off of HBO. Never bought a movie in his life. He just taped them all, just bootleg movies all over his house. But he showed me a lot of Carlin, and that was like immediately after that, I found out Comedy Central was a thing, and I just started like seeking out stand up as much as I could. And back then, that was most of what Comedy Central played was just different stand-up shows and then a lot of Whose Line Is It Anyway? So I was just like obsessed with that stuff, obsessed with SNL. That was definitely the time that I started to realize like somebody's doing this, right? Someone's making this TV show. So like maybe that's a more realistic lane to choose as far as crazy things to pursue.
Do you remember what you thought of Carlin when you first saw his material when it was first shown to you? Do you remember your reaction at all?
It blew my mind. I just didn't know that, like, I think he was the first person I witnessed, like, really critically thinking in a funny way. Like, as a kid, I think, especially up until middle school-ish age, like, you just don't know shit. You're just kind of thumbing around, seeing what works. You don't, you don't have a personal philosophy or anything like that. But as you hit that middle school age, and that was right when I started to see Carlin was like, I realized he had a lot of questions about things that I always had questions about that I couldn't put into words because I was a kid. But things like religion and like, massive corporations, and then down to like stupid little things, like funny things about words. It just was a way of thinking that I had never encountered. And I remember being like, yeah, that's what pisses me off. Like we went to church as a family. We weren't super religious, but I felt like I had questions. And that was the first guy I saw and on TV to do that was just like, oh my God, he's saying so many things that I also want the answers to. So yeah, man, I feel like I just remember being like in awe of him. Every time I had a chance to incorporate like a George Carlin quote into anything I had to write for school, I was always doing that. We had to do like journal entries, and all I would do was break down Carlin bits for my journal entries. It was just like he became kind of an obsession for a long time between like middle school and most of high school.
I would probably say similar for myself. I don't know how much I quoted him in in my school essays, but me and my friends, we would definitely go around quoting him for sure, out of context, just reciting George Carlin lines. And it's interesting how you describe him as someone who, does political stuff, talks about religion, but he'll also be super duper silly and just talk about language constantly. So I feel like he covers so much. There's just something that will appeal to anyone. And once you're kind of like sucked into one aspect of his comedy, I feel like you're going to go along for the ride and be into really all of it. It's just amazing how much diversity there is with his material.
Yeah. I mean, I remember thinking like, what he did was so brilliant because he covered such a large scope, from the darkest of the dark things to the lightest and silliest things, that like, I feel like he would start his specials off and kind of pull you in with like clever wordplay, and you're like, oh, this guy, you realize quickly he's really smart, and what he's doing is very clever and very subtle. And then throughout he builds to, like, by the end, I remember, his special in 99 was You Were All Diseased. And he builds up to this huge religion piece at the end that I feel like as a kid, it stuck with me so much. But I think if he started that special with that, I would have been like almost afraid of it. It was such a, like, he was attacking this thing that people didn't really attack openly. And but he built up to it. He built so much credibility by showing you how smart and how funny he was. You're like, all right, I got to hear him out. And in the end, he ends up making that a silly joke too, and talk about like how he prays to Joe Pesci because there's prayers with the same effectiveness as God. And it's amazing. It's just still like, it sticks in your brain, man.
Worships the sun and prays to Joe Pesci.
Yes.
I remember it well.
That's great, man. It's so funny. And it's still like, I'll go back and watch his stuff today just to, every time I watch it, it's like just a class in writing. It's sometimes a little discouraging because you watch it and you're like, Jesus, this guy was just operating on another level than everyone else. But as a kid, it was just like, he was definitely really profound in my childhood and kind of changing what path I was on.
Yeah, and his stuff stands up today. It's still relevant today. It's still quoted today. I mean, people, not just me, like, I feel like we wonder, what might George Carlin think about XYZ? I wish I could see a George Carlin special. Like, I feel like we're almost like deprived. Like, there's so many like dead people that I want to like interview on my podcast. I want to interview George Carlin and Jimi Hendrix and all these like, legends who've done creative things over the years. Amazing.
Yeah.
Things.
I mean, you can't imagine what Carlin would do with what the amount of material the world would be giving him right now. Is like, and that was a thing too. That was always weirdly comforting about him. I remember, after 9/11 happened, he had a special come out like a couple months later, and it felt good to hear him talk about it. Cause it was like, I need to hear him rationalize this. I need to hear him have a take on it that makes me able to like process what the fuck happened. And I just found out recently that apparently he had recorded an hour special the day before 9/11, and they had to completely toss it because it was called I Like It When a Lot of People Die. And like, there was a huge chunk in it that was all about like, he was obviously exaggerating, but he's talking about how he loves when mass death events happen, and he's sitting there counting the ticker and just, he's just shitting on that like American mentality of like being obsessed with terrible things. But apparently
it's like death porn or tragedy porn kind of stuff.
But apparently that's available. Like, you can listen to it, I think, on Spotify. And I just found out about it today. I'm like blown away by it, but I can't wait because it's like a new special from him. So
that one in after 9/11, that wasn't his last special, was it? Last special? No,
his last one was the year he died.
Yeah, I thought so.
2008.
Yeah, and I remember that last one. I mean, he was moving around a little bit slower, looked a little bit older, but the material was he was very dark and very, and of course funny, but like, just till the day he died, he always had that attitude, sort of a rebellious attitude
Oh
and
yeah, man. And I mean, the
subversive
Edge,
attitude.
it was such a weird thing too. Sometimes thinking back on like when I became such a huge fan of him, he was such an old man, and I was such a kid, and that's like not a cool thing. Like, who's your favorite comedian? Oh, this guy my grandpa's age. But his age was so irrelevant because he had
Right.
grown over the years. He had grown into like the perfect comic from, I think, trying to be a lot of other things and a lot of other versions of himself first, and then like realized I think later in life how disappointed he was with a lot of the world, and that was when he just like honed in on what he was, and that's such a cool thing.
And what's cool is that he didn't come across ever as, like, to me at least, as like an old and crotchety man, or even like an angry man. And maybe he didn't come across as angry to me because I sort of, I've heard him in interviews and seen a lot, and a lot of his material is silly. So when you're seeing him angry or get worked up, it's not really like, you don't get the sense that he's an angry person. He's always
Yeah,
seemed like a pretty at peace person. He wasn't someone who was like, concerned about Hollywood or an image or anything like that. He was always like his
yeah,
down to earth sort of like, edgy self that just came natural to him.
yeah. I mean, I think like he always struck me as like frustrated more than angry. Like he was bothered by the world, but he was also a realist about it and accepted it for what it was and admitted what it was when like
Right.
nobody really would. He would say things that people, would be taken aback, but then you look at what he said and you're like, but that's the truth, really. Like you're just, people just don't say it. And that was the beauty of him, was it wasn't coming from a place of anger. It was coming from a place of honesty. And it was just like, be honest with yourselves about what the church is, or about what your country is and how it operates. Like, and that's why I think now, especially, like, man, you'd love to hear what he has to say, because I think he had a way of getting through to people. He especially, you hear that as a kid and you realize someone's making a really great point and they're making it in a way that makes you laugh. That can completely change how you think about everything. And sometimes I think like he probably deserves more credit for the way I look at life in general in the world than a lot of people in my life, just because he saw it in a way that I identified with, and I ran with that.
For sure. Yeah. He's a legend, my friend. And what about high school? It sounded like you were just continuing to dive deeper into comedy and get into comedy and watch it on TV. Did you know you were going to want to be a stand-up comedian, or are you talking about getting into writing and entertainment sort of in high school? In some
Yeah.
capacity seemed like where we were headed.
Yeah, yeah. And high school was when like I started to. I tried writing a bit in middle school, like creative writing projects. I always liked, but it just never occurred to me that was anything to pursue, really. But yeah, once I started watching a ton of comedy, and then you'd see at the end who it was written by, and it was written by the guy who performed it. So you're like, oh, that's a writer. That guy's a good writer. So it kind of made me realize that like maybe writing was something I could pursue that I actually gave a shit about. Because once I accepted I wasn't going to be a professional athlete, I didn't care that much about anything enough to pursue it. Like the thought of a real job was just always very unappealing to me. So yeah, it was quickly in high school. It was like, take all the writing classes you can. And a lot of it was, like dramatic, creative writing. I have a lot of stuff that I've written that I like think back on and I'm like, oh, Jesus, bro. Like,
Yeah.
just, like an over dramatic high school kid trying to be a poet. Like, but I realized I could incorporate a lot of humor into my writing. So I started doing that a ton, and that slowly grew into the thought of like, maybe I'll try and do stand-up. But that was so far off. That was so scary and foreign to me because, being in New York, but being just far enough away from the city that like getting into the actual world of entertainment seemed insane. The only thing I thought was maybe attainable was like, maybe be a TV writer. I don't know their faces. They don't have to perform. But upstate New York, I had no clue really how to pursue that. So it was always just kind of a vague thing in my head, but it was always there. It was always just like, I'm going to do something that I give a shit about one way or another. I'm not going to let myself settle and do something that I'll regret giving my life to.
That's cool. And what about like junior, senior year of high school? Did you have thoughts about college or moving to LA or New York, or where were you at, like academically, career wise? Where were we headed?
I was kind of just in a gray area then. I was doing well in school, but I stopped working hard enough to get into like a great college. I was kind of pretty content with like, I'll just go to whatever school because I'm just going to probably start doing stand-up at whatever college I go to and I'll drop out anyway. Like, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had a girlfriend at the time who was away she was a year older than me, so she went away to college. And, at that age, that was the priority for me, was just like hanging out with her. So I didn't really pursue anything. And college, late high school, college just became like, I'm going to party my ass off time. Like, it was, I was young and dumb and enjoying myself and kind of put like pursuing anything legitimate to the side and just drank a lot, really.
Where did you go to school?
Well, I went to Marist in Poughkeepsie. That's upstate New York. I went there for 3 years. I originally went to Wagner in Staten Island. I transferred out of there because I didn't like it. And then ended up at Marist. And I did study TV and film there, but that was like, honestly, a product of like, well, I like TV and movies and I don't feel like working hard. So like,
right.
I took those courses. It was a small school and that was a small program. So like I learned a ton, but it didn't really help me in any way get close to the industry.
Sure.
So it was a bit of like, in the long run, I wish I could tell my 18-year-old self, like, hey, just go get a job for a few years and figure out what you want. Like, go wait tables and bartend, which I was doing anyway. And then, like, I probably would have started stand-up. But college ended up being such a great time. It's like, you can tell yourself all you want that you should have done it in a different way. But it's also like, I was 18. I just wanted to fuck around.
Does it help shape us as a person? Like because I sort of had a similar college experience in some regard. I studied film, but maybe I would tell myself, maybe don't go to Syracuse University and get student loans and all this stuff, and go.
That's the biggest thing, man.
Go take one writing class and see if you like screenwriting. Go, get a job in production or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was that's the biggest thing, was the money, and I was the same way. I in one sense, I didn't want to work hard enough to get a scholarship anywhere, but I also didn't want to go to a lot of the state schools that my friends were going to, because I was worried I would fuck around too much there and probably, fail out or just not end up going anywhere after. So I was like, I'm going to go to one of the better schools. And then you go to Syracuse, you go to a private school and you rack up a ton of debt. And like at that age, I had no concept, like my family didn't have any money, so they weren't helping. It was just like, I'm going to get loans and I guess I'll pay them back when I'm fucking 90. It's crazy.
And what about after college? Where were your plans? Where did we go?
Well, I ended up getting an office job in Manhattan that I despised. I don't even remember how I got it, honestly. It was like I was working at a financial recruiting firm to pay the bills and to drink on the weekends, basically. Sure. And I had a great time, but like I did it for a year, and it was really great for me because it made me positive that like that was not an option going forward. This is not going to work out for me staying in this kind of life. I just cared about it so little that I just wouldn't do work. I just would like fuck around all day at work. I was a horrible employee. But I saw the older guys there and I saw some of their mentalities and I just kind of realized like, I'd rather kind of take a shot at doing something I want to do than end up here, even if I make a living. Like, I just didn't want to be that guy who hated his job.
Sure.
So I did that for a while, and then started applying to grad schools to try and get into a program for screenwriting that actually had a little weight, and applied to USC, and basically had decided at that point I was either going to move out here to LA and go to school if I got in, or I was just going to move to Manhattan full time and bartend and do stand up and see what happened. And I got into school, so I ended up here.
So you never really had, did you do stand up at all in New York?
Nope, I didn't. I wrote a lot, like in that year of that job that I hated. I started writing stand up because I started realizing I got to try this. I have to at least see if I can do it. So I had like a notebook full of really early, horrible, long jokes. And, but it was just like this sort of stuff that I'm like, oh, I think you could bring that on stage. But yeah, because I ended up getting into school out here, I came out here and started pretty soon after getting here, like almost a little over 10 years ago now.
So you were at USC studying screenwriting, you said?
Yeah.
And you were doing stand-up as well.
Racking up more student loan debt that didn't have enough.
Did you tell me about the USC screenwriting program? Did you get through that? Did you finish it? Did you learn a lot?
I finished it. It was great. I learned a ton. I mean, the money was just bananas, but like I did meet enough people there that things have since happened through. That it was worth it, I think. That's
what it's all about when you go to UCLA, USC, especially within the film program.
It just helped me get more consideration for jobs because people want to help. They want to hire people from the school they went to, and they want to support their alumni and stuff. And it just looks good on like a resume. It helped me get good internships that then later led to jobs. And, it just started a chain reaction. So it was really good for me for that reason. I get to study with a guy who wrote for The Simpsons that I just, that's like my favorite show ever. So just taking a screenwriting class with a dude who like was coming there that night from his job on The Simpsons was just like, oh my God, I'm in Hollywood. Like, this is it. It was, it was crazy to me. And I still talk to him.
That's awesome because I hear that a lot of screenwriting courses, acting courses, and other creative courses, believe it or not, are not taught by people who have had success in those fields.
Yeah, he was an adjunct. He was not a full-time professor. You learn from some people that there was some people at Marist, especially my undergrad, that was like they knew what they were talking about more than I did, so they taught me things, but they also definitely were like high-level bullshitters in what they had done and like how qualified they even were to be teaching the class.
Sure.
But once I got to USC, there was a bit more legit weight to it. I had a couple classes with Sid Field, who wrote the books, all of the books on screenwriting, and it's like he didn't write a lot of successful screenplays, but he wrote a fuckload of books about it. So like it was good from him, and I ended up getting an internship at Comedy Central while I was at USC, and that ended up leading to me knowing about the job at Tosh even being open, and eventually getting that. So it was all worth it, I think.
One thing leads to another. Tell me about the early days of doing stand-up in LA while you were in grad school.
Yeah, man, that's tough. It was a weird place to start. LA is not, and honestly, New York would have been bad too. Had I known, I would have tried to start in a smaller city where I could get more stage time and build up experience. I feel like when you get to LA and you start doing stand-up, everybody you meet has been doing it for 5 years at least. And like, they all assume you have to. So it was this weird thing where I was like shitting my pants nervous, and at the same time didn't want to let people know like this is my second time doing it. I just wanted them to judge me based on what I did. So it was a weird time. It was a lot of open mics at a lot of crazy random LA venues. And, you'd wait for like 3 hours to do 5 minutes, and you had to buy 2 drinks to even get up on stage. And it was like a lot of nights out and a lot of them that weren't worth it, but it was fun. It was fun to be doing it. It felt so cool. I just wasn't doing anything that I had cared about at home. So like being out at some random coffee shop, in a crazy part of downtown on a Tuesday night at 11 p.m. was just like, well, this is interesting. I guess I'm going to keep doing it. It was a fun time and it was a weird time, but it was at the end of the day, I'm kind of glad I started here because it forced me to figure out what I wanted to do on stage a little faster. It forced me to get better a little faster, I think, because you got to get booked. It was fun doing that and studying screenwriting during the day. I was just finally doing things I cared about,
That's cool. Do you remember, improving in the first like 3, 4, 5, 6 months at stand up and starting to get more and more laughs and what that felt like? Do you remember any making progress, early progress?
Yeah, I do. I remember probably 6 months or so in, the feeling of absolute dread that I had going on stage started to drop off fairly quickly. And like, I still get nervous. I think a lot of comics do, but like that first year starting out, it was like, it was hard sticking with it. But I remember somewhere around 6, 8 months in, I think I met a few comics that I really liked and got along with that I thought were really funny. And they seemed to be, like, at least respect what I was trying to do and knew that I was new, but like encouraged me. And it just kind of became like, yeah, I'm definitely not going to quit. I just realized like, I'm going to keep doing this and see what happens.
That's cool. Do you remember like trying a joke in one place and it working and then not working somewhere else and working somewhere else? And I mean, I'm sure that still happens to this day, and obviously the environment can affect this, but did that ever frustrate you, or does that ever frustrate you where it's like you can't, it's hard to know whether a joke is good or not because it works sometimes and other times
Yeah.
doesn't?
Yeah. And that can be really, that's one of the hardest parts about doing stand up here, I think, is that there's so many comics here and the sets are so short that if you tell any kind of longer jokes, you just don't get the opportunity that much to tell them in front of, to tell a new joke in front of like a really great audience. You get that opportunity when you go out on the road and do longer sets and can shove it in the middle. But I remember back then, I started out probably trying to get a few too many shock laughs, I think. I was saying like gross things on stage that sometimes I look back at them and I'm like, I can't believe you fucking said that in a room full of people, because it's not my style really. But I had like this long joke, for example, about the show on TLC called I Didn't Know I Was Pregnant, which I feel like every comic around that time had a hacky joke about this show. And the premise was a woman didn't know she was pregnant until she had
That's a joke in itself. It almost writes
Exactly.
itself in some
Craziness. But I went into like this ridiculous long joke about her figuring out what was happening and like on the toilet. And it was so gross. And I was so not good enough at comedy yet to be trying like material that out there. And that was the first joke I remember where like it did really well at a bringer show at the Comedy Store one night. And I was like, oh shit, this is like my first really good joke. And then the next time I told it, it did terribly. And then the next time I told it, it did even worse. And I think part of it was like I started writing different stuff and going away from that sort of material. So when I would retell it, my heart wasn't in even trying to get them on board with it. But also it was just like, I don't think that this is that funny. So why am I telling it on stage? I'm telling it because I think it's what's going to make people laugh. So I remember like kind of coming to terms with the difference between those two things, like a joke that you actually believe in and a joke that you're just trying to get cheap laughs out of.
Do you think part of the going for the shock value thing when you're younger is also, it's like sort of maybe two things, a maturity thing, you're not as mature a person, and also maybe like in some ways, like going on stage it's like a fear factor thing. Like it's like conquering a fear or like a thrilling thing. So there's sort of probably a thrill as well
Oh
to
yeah,
telling sort of an off-color joke. So
yeah,
between like maybe not being as mature as you are today and going for a thrill, is that sort of maybe why young comedians might gravitate towards bluer material?
definitely, definitely. And I definitely still have jokes where I say gross stuff, and it's just that like I think it was so not a joke. It was much more of like, I'm just going to say a bunch of gross things in a row and get the audience to groan so hard that it turns into a laugh. But it was like, that was the reaction that I got mostly, was even at the comedy store. It was just like a lot of like, oh my God, dude, like what? There was a lot of like, you shouldn't be saying this kind of reaction. And I mistook that with like success briefly, because honestly, at that point, any noise in the room is like, I'll take any noise. If you can, when you play to that much silence early in doing stand up, it's like, at least if the audience is reacting, they're present. So I think it was more out of the desire to just, and that I'm comfortable and I'm going to say whatever I want.
Yeah, for sure. You know, it's interesting 'cause I talked to some other comics about this. It's like if you try to fit in a dirty joke or a blue joke, whatever, in the middle of your set, and you haven't established yourself as that type of comic or have that type of energy, they're like less likely to go along for the ride. They'll see you as, oh, you're the nice guy who talks about his grandmother. How could you be making the jokes about the what was the TV show you just said? I didn't know I was pregnant. Like they won't go along because it's like they don't see you as
Yeah,
that type of comic. Is there truth to that when that happens?
for sure. Absolutely. I think that early part, you're just figuring out like who are you going to be on stage and what works for you. And I remember realizing that wasn't really where I wanted to go. And I kind of dropped like 60% of the jokes I had been telling and just started writing new ones.
And what was the content more focused on with the new stuff? Like, is
It was
there?
much more about me. It was a lot less about like analyzing things on TV or making jokes at like the expense of some celebrity or something. Like
Yeah.
I just started making it more about like personal stories that I thought were funny. Just stuff in my life, relationship stuff, that sort of thing, because that was the type of comedy I gravitated towards anyway.
You're developing as an artist and finding yourself, my friend.
Yeah, exactly. I also
There,
stopped doing horrible bringer shows. That was a thing you have to learn
there you
early in
go.
the comic. Stop making your friends come out to these terrible shows and just kind of suffer through whatever shows will book you, even though they weren't, not a lot of good ones in that first year, but they were great spots in LA at the time to work out as a newer comic. And luckily I found them.
You're not the only comic I've spoke to who has regrets about bringer shows. That's.
I mean, you just don't know, man. Suddenly somebody's like, hey, you want to perform at the Comedy Store? I'm like, fucking yes, I made it. I've done it. And they're like, oh, you just got to get 10 people out. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's just their thing for newer comics. And after a
Yeah.
few, you realize like, I brought friends to a few shows, especially at the Comedy Store at the time, that were like 3 hours long. And 90% of the comics were just god awful. Like just shouldn't have been doing comedy, just starting out, just trying it. And I didn't realize, I thought it would be more like, 1 to 3 year comics who were really committed to it. So I ended up like apologizing to my friends after every show. Like, oh, I swear to God, I'll pay you back. I'm sorry. How much for parking? We shouldn't have done this to you.
Yeah, it's stressful. It's tough when you're starting out for sure. But tell me more about the journey after that, and maybe some of the highlights or even lowlights or challenges. I'll kind of give you the floor, and you can tell me more about your comedy journey. Beyond the early years.
So, I mean, pretty quickly, I stopped doing like when I stopped doing the bringer type shows or certain open mics that had proven that like I wasn't going to get anything out of them, and I started kind of fine tuning about where I was going to go and work on my stuff. Then you kind of find your crowd of comics too, and I met a handful of people that I think really helped me believe I could do it and convince me to stop doing those types of bullshit shows and just commit to like working harder on the better shows and trying to make sure your writing was good enough when you got the opportunity to get a good show that you'd do well enough to get booked at the next one and the next one. And that's really all it became about, was like just meeting as many comics as I could in LA and getting recommended to better and better rooms. And, I started hanging out at the clubs, and like probably way before I should have, but just like trying to be a part of that scene on like the Comedy Store patio and shit like that. This is back when the Comedy Store was still like a terrifying, weird place. Not as friendly as it is now, but it was just a lot of bar shows, a lot of coffee shop shows, a lot of trying to get on the open mics at the clubs and get seen. And I think I was probably like 2 years in before I started taking like smaller gigs out of town and would just start driving anywhere that had a stand-up show and I could get 10 minutes. I'd drive 3 hours to San Diego on a weeknight just to get stage time. Like, wow. It was just scrapping for the early years. You just got to do it. I knew I could get stage time down there that I couldn't get here. The competition here is so crazy that it was like, all right, if I drive to San Diego, I can get in front of a real audience of real people. And if I stay up here and perform, it's probably going to be at a bar where the patrons are not there for the show. So I just started going wherever the better stage time was. A lot of like short road gigs. And that was around the time too, when I got hired at Tosh to work on their blog. That was back when blogs were still a thing. So I was lucky enough to get that job, and that started helping me book stand-up stuff. Just being associated with the show and writing for their website was like at least a small credit.
Sure.
And that's when I just started building it out. Me and some guys there started doing like small tours while the show was on hiatus. We toured the whole West Coast one summer, then we did the East Coast the next summer, and just doing like mostly small gigs. But these small venues in smaller cities would book us as like, they'd give us our own show because we were coming from LA and we all worked on this show that people knew. And that was like really where I started to get to do longer sets and figure out like, I think that's when I really started to figure out who I was as a comic. Was getting to do like a half hour was such a mind blower when everything in LA was a 7-minute set that was like, if you go over, they're going to drag you off stage because there's 9 other comics on the show.
No doubt. Besides the competition and the stage time, what other sort of challenges, or not even challenges, but what sort of jumps out at you as far as what's maybe not great behavior within the scene from other comics or other people? What have you learned not to do, over the years?
I mean, I've learned a lot about how not to run a show. LA has so many comics and so many shows, and people, everybody wants to run a show early on. That's such a huge way to get more stage time, is to have quality stage time to offer. I was lucky enough to kind of stumble on a venue called the Virgil right when it opened in LA. And it's just a bar that had a performance side to it and this like beautiful stage. And they didn't have any comedy at that point. They had only done music. So that was like, it was a huge thing for me because I saw it as like, this is a room that makes sense for comedy. This will work for comedy. It had all the things that a lot of the shows I was doing didn't have. It had that separate space where it was like, if you were on this side of the bar, you were there for the show. I had done so many bar shows that were just tucked in a corner while like everybody's watching the Lakers playoffs. And it was
I hate that so much. I hate that as a fan of comedy, when you're at a show and you hear sound from, when you hear other music playing, even if it's just not super loud or in the background, other music playing, other people not paying attention, like it's screens on, every 5 million screens on in the background.
Yeah. I think it's hard to explain to people that like that shit matters, because a lot of people's mentality is like, well, it's comedy. Like, you just work with it. You do what you do, and it'll be funny. And like, they don't realize how delicate it is for like a show to work. A lot of things have to be done right. And I did so many bar shows and so many just random venue shows that just shouldn't have had comedy. And I get the ambition to have a show, but for me, it was like, I was never going to try to run a show until I found a spot that made sense. And when I found that spot, I jumped on it and ended up running a show there for 4 years. And that was like the kind of next big step for me in stand-up, at least, was like, now I had a show that people knew was pretty good, or at least worthwhile, at a good venue that then started growing. They started booking a bunch of other stand-up shows that were hosted by way more high-profile people than me and my buddy Keith Carey, super funny dude who's doing great things now. But like, at the time, nobody knew who either one of us was at all. But that bar became this real comedy venue all of a sudden. So having a show there was like a big deal. And then it opened up a lot of doors for me to get booked on maybe the kind of the next level of better shows that I wasn't getting booked on before. And that's all it all, it's been that for 10 years. It's like this kind of slow, weird climb. And you kind of figure out where you want to be and what you want to do with time. Like, I still absolutely love it, but I also am like, I'm not doing a bunch of Zoom shows right now. I'm just like, I miss fucking stand up. I miss
me too.
being on stage. I don't want to try to do that Zoom thing where it just doesn't, I don't think it's going to feed that kind of need I have at the moment for real stand up. So like, and then like there's other comics that are so hardcore. They're doing like 7 shows a week on Zoom. And I'm like, God, I respect it, but that's a hard thing at some point you kind of lose a bit of hustle. And I feel like I've lost at least enough hustle to not do a lot of digital shows.
Did you ever get credit for bringing comedy to the Virgil?
No, I don't think so.
No one ever recognized you and your buddy. You guys were the trailblazers, though.
I mean, I pointed it out all the time because, but it was honestly by so little. But like, I like to think that I opened the Virgil's eyes to realizing that comedy totally made sense there. They were just such a music venue, and it has such a music look. But it was also like there's such a small difference between a great small music venue is almost always a great comedy venue, because the smaller the better for these bar shows, especially if you can get a tight little space that feels like a little comedy club, which is what the Virgil was. It's huge. And we started our show there I think it was in November of one year, whatever year it was, I don't remember, 2013 maybe. But we started it in November. We did it monthly. And then I think in January, Kurt Braunohler and Kristen Shaw, who had been running the Hot Tub show in Brooklyn for years that was really like hugely successful, they started Hot Tub LA at the Virgil. And that was just immediately like, that changed our expectations completely, because suddenly it went from like, we're going to run this show and we're going to book comics at our level and our friends and see what happens. Then all of a sudden it was like actual headliners were interested in getting on our show and were reaching out. So it was like, all right, I guess we can actually like meet all these comics that we fucking love through this show. And it gave me the opportunity to see so many great comics that like, any bad part of running a show was absolutely worth the time I got to see like people that I watched on Comedy Central growing up just crush it on stage at my show.
That's awesome. That must have been quite a thrill for sure. Tell me about a little bit about working for Tosh.0 for the writing and your podcast and what you're working on these days. And I'll let you get out of here.
Yeah. So I've been at Tosh for 8 years almost, man. That's like crazy to even say. So I started as their blogger, one of their bloggers, and then that eventually became not even a thing anymore. But I got promoted to staff writer, and I've been a staff writer there for 3.5 seasons. It's great. It's a great job. It's like I finally get to do what I had set out to do, which was write jokes and get paid. Like, if I can, even now, as hard as this whole time has been, now that we started work back up, the fact that I can sit in my garage during the day and just write these just dumb fucking jokes and dumb sketches that are like, it's fun. It's just, it's been such a great job to me. I love everybody I work with. We all get along really well. We're super tight. It's just a great time. And that sort of, being associated with it and then getting promoted to writer definitely has helped me along in stand up. Now I kind of, when we're on hiatus, sometimes I'll do a tour myself, and it's not, I'm not playing stadiums. I'm not headlining clubs yet, but I'm also able to headline smaller venues and have the show be mine and do 45 minutes or an hour. And so, all the time I've spent at Tosh is just like, it's changed my mentality about the whole thing. It legitimized me in a way. I guess it was like, instead of telling people I'm trying to be a writer, I could now be like, I'm a writer. I swear to God, like I get checks for it.
That's awesome. Congratulations on that success for sure. What, and you also have a podcast that obviously we covered it earlier.
Yeah. So me and my buddy Dwayne Perkins, who is also super hilarious comic. He's one of the dudes who I met early in my career who was like way ahead of me. Like Dwayne I had seen his Comedy Central Presents. Like he was on Late Night a bunch. So like to me, it was like hanging out with Dwayne was like, this dude's where I'm trying to be. And it quickly, like I quickly just realized like, oh, this is just a great dude. And we became really good friends. We started a podcast called Movie Night, and it was just like honestly started as an excuse that like, let's have a reason to watch a new movie every week, and we'll just kind of shoot the shit about it. We both know film and studied it to some extent, but we're by no stretch like, film nerds and like experts on every little thing.
You're a regular dude.
Want to talk about movies. Yeah, exactly. That was kind of the pitch for it, was like, it's just two regular guys who like movies talking about it with a guest who is almost always a comic, but sometimes, people from other parts of the industry. But we've been doing that, man, forever. We're at episode 299 when the world kind of stopped in its tracks. So we're sitting on 299. I think we're going to wait to do like a big, cool 300 episode when things get a little bit more back to normal. But it's been like a super fun run, and just another fun avenue. That's the cool thing about comedy now, is you can kind of get yourself out there in so many different ways. And for me, if it was like, if I could gain any kind of fans from just talking about movies, like this doesn't feel like work, it was hanging out with my friends talking about movies. So it's been a blast. And now we're kind of trying to figure out our next thing. We love doing it, and we're probably going to continue doing the Movie Night podcast in some capacity regardless, but we're also trying to come up with like a new idea, something different to do together. To you just kind of have to always be making stuff here, which is exhausting but fun too.
You talking about a new podcast, or just digital content, or just a new project, or any or all the above?
I think probably all the above. I mean, I hope all the above, but a podcast for sure. I think we're going to start doing the movie one maybe more like once a month thing instead of once a week, because we love doing it. But we've done 300 movies, and it's we've gotten to a point where it's like, all right, we'd like to talk about other stuff. So I think we're probably going to open it up a bit more and just make it something that hinges a bit more on our comedy and our dynamic that covers more topics. But movies will absolutely still be. We both love doing it, and we want to have that excuse to like keep saying like, oh, I gotta watch this movie. I have to do it. It's homework.
For sure. And what about more longer term goals, plans, and dreams? Is it to to have a big nationwide stand-up tour, to Netflix special? What are the writing and stand-up and other hopes, dreams, goals, plans in the long term or otherwise?
That's evolving a lot lately. Partly having a kid has changed a lot of my mindset. Yeah, and partly the world crumbling before our eyes has changed my mindset. But I think my goal has always sort of been to keep writing, keep doing stand-up, because I love doing both of them, and I only want to do them for for that reason. So I guess what I mean is would I love to do a huge national, stand-up tour? Absolutely. But is that the be-all, end-all for me? Not really. For me, it's more about I just love doing stand-up. I want to continue doing it and see what it grows into. And if at some point my own writing, I write a lot of, my own scripts, original stuff that I'm trying to sell in addition to writing on Tosh, I'm trying to pursue my own things, and I'm super into adult animation. Like I said, I love The Simpsons, so I've always been trying to write that animated adult script that'll sell. So if that takes off, then it's more all right, follow it in that direction. I just kind of I like pursuing comedy in the stand-up vein, in the writing vein, in the podcast vein, and it's just see what happens, see what catches.
I hear you.
I don't know about...
Makes sense.
Yeah, I just feel for me, stand-up more than anything is just that release of pressure. It gives you that more than anything else, which is why I think I won't stop doing it. Because sitting at home writing a script in my garage is fun and you can kind of get lost in it, but it's not, it doesn't depressurize you in any way. And with the way the world is now, I'm man, I could just use the chance to get up on stage for 10 minutes and just let some shit breathe, let some stuff out. So I think I'll always stick with it for the reason that I just love that catharsis and the joy that it brings you when a crowd laughs at something that matters to you, something that you've written, something that you've said on stage by yourself. When you get that reaction, you just don't get that from any other kind of comedy. That's why stand-up is just unique in that way.
Yeah, there's a human connection and then also an instant gratification for the comic, I'm sure, in a positive way, in a good way for sure. Cool. We covered a lot. Why don't you tell people where they can find you, follow you, anything else you want to cover, mention? I'll give you the floor. Let you do your thing.
Yeah, man, I'm, on social media at TK Kelly Comedy. I finally deleted my Facebook. It's done. I'm gone. I'm done with it. I can't do that shit anymore. But I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and hopefully on stage again soon. I know some live shows are starting to pop up around, outdoor stuff. So I'm really hoping to get back to stand up soon. And when I do, I'll be posting all those dates on social media. And follow Movie Night on Instagram. It's at Movie Nightcast. I believe it's the same handle on Twitter. It's been a while. We haven't been doing it. But there's 299 episodes. So if you're looking for some time to kill and you like movies, odds are we've talked about a lot of movies you like. So, give it a shot. You got the time.
Sweet. Well, I'll be sure to check all that stuff out and hopefully see you on stage sooner than later, maybe 2021. But there's been some outdoor stuff popping up, so I'll be on the lookout for sure. But again, thank you so much. I'll let you enjoy the rest of your evening, and let's talk soon.
Thanks so much, man. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me.
So there you have it, my conversation with TK Kelly. That was fun. I appreciate TK's time for sure. We really dug deep into George Carlin, who is pretty much my favorite comedian of all time, too. And so many other people's out there as well, for sure. For everything about this show, of course, head to peoplewelove.podcast.com. And I think that's about all I got for today. I appreciate you guys listening, as always. And thank you. And let's talk soon. Peace.